Hello, everybody. Welcome back. You're just about to watch the 4th episode of our panel discussions about the Negro League players. Today, you're going to be watching the one about the shortstops of the Negro Leagues. We've got 3 worthy candidates, and one of them I'd like you to choose to be added to the canvas behind me. I'll come back at the end of this video where I'll tell you a little bit more about how you can do that and where you can do that. Okay, so now we are going to be discussing the shortstop position. The first up that we've got is John Henry Lloyd, John Henry Pop Lloyd, born in 1884 and died in 1964. Again, like all of the players that I'm looking at or have been suggested for this painting, it's quite incredible when you look at the statistics, the feats, the achievements, the lifetime batting average. There's a huge amount which indicates that he was quite the player. What would you guys say are his main or his strongest attributes, or his reasonings to be renowned and remembered so fondly and so well?
Well, longevity, for one thing, which isn't the only thing. 27 years of active playing, partly as a playing manager. He managed 4 different Negro League teams that I know of. Hilldale, the Lincoln Giants, the Backrack Giants, and the Columbus Buckeyes. 338 hitter, not a lot of power, but of course, I had said in one of these previous episodes that really there were only 3 players from the pre-Negro League period. I forgot that Lloyd was so good and he managed so many teams that you start to forget about the fact he started playing professional baseball in 1905, played for the Philadelphia Giants, one of the best pre-league black teams, played for the Cuban ex-Giants, another of the best pre-league black teams. He played his way through a couple of different eras, if not more, of black baseball, and he played all the time. He was he's mostly renowned as a shortstop. This is not necessary. I got to say I did a book on the Backrack Atlantic City Backrack Giants, and Lloyd was the player manager then for a few years. He was just tremendously respected guy. Mm-hmm. He came to the Backracks, I think, in 24, and Dick Lundy was the playing manager, the guy we'll talk about next or soon. He was a playing manager, and he was a shortstop. And then Lloyd got hired. Well, Lloyd became the manager. Lundy lost that job. But Lloyd had always been a shortstop. And since he was often a manager, he got to pick the shortstop. And he took a look around at this younger guy who was a 300 hitter and he shifted himself to second base. He gave up his position, went to second. Of course, now you've got this fantastic double play combination. After he finally retired, he went on to several other teams. After he finally retired, he moved back to Atlantic City, got a job as a custodian in the local African-American elementary school, because Atlantic City wasn't segregated by law, but by fact and practice it was in those days. And he became the baseball coach for these young kids, some of whom didn't have fathers at home. Pop Lloyd, this is when he started to be known as Pop Lloyd. He taught these kids baseball. He had a bucket full of baseball gloves and baseballs, and he'd go out on the field and play with them. And in the late 40s, the city built a nice covered stand baseball field, which is still around, and they called it John Henry Lloyd Field. That's how respected he was at the end of his life, and that's really how respected he was going backwards through his career.
He was called by Bill Yancey, another one of the players. He called him the greatest player, the greatest manager, the greatest teacher of any player that he had ever seen. And so, to Jim's point, but for me, it was always his fielding seemed to be what he was. I mean, he was, and his nickname coming out of was El Cucharacha, the shovel. He just picked up everything, and the idea that nothing got past him. He had a lot of range. He had appears to have had a pretty strong arm and the ability to shift from second to short. He also spent 12 years in Cuba playing as well, in addition to his Negro League years. And I thought it was kind of impressive that I didn't realize when he was playing with the Chicago American Giants, he batted cleanup for most of his time with them, which is because he wasn't necessarily that sort of, because we tend to think of, at least I do, more for his fielding. And then to realize that as well, I thought that was rather something important to mention.
And I guess I'd like to add some opinions of the man, because I deal in stats, opinions, and legends. Babe Ruth is quoted, I'm not sure how accurate, but he's quoted as saying that John Henry Lloyd was the best player he ever saw. Connie Mack is quoted as saying if you had a choice between Lloyd and Wagner, you put their names in a hat and randomly pulled one out, you couldn't lose. Mm-hmm. And finally, a St. Louis sports writer named Ted Harlow, when he was asked who the best player he ever saw was, he said, well, if you mean Major League Baseball, Babe Ruth. But if you mean baseball, period, John Henry Lloyd. So that's high praise indeed from three white observers. One other thing I want to point out, and this is my favorite John Henry Lloyd record. In 1924, he cracked 11 straight hits. That streak was stopped by, of course, Rap Dixon's Harrisburg Giants. The pitcher who stopped Lloyd was also the same pitcher that stopped Dixon when he broke that record 5 years later.
Mm. I had a quick question for you there. You talked about the relationship and, Babe Ruth talking about John Henry Lloyd. And it seems like there was a huge amount of respect between the two leagues or certain players. Do you think that was a rare thing? It seems like that Babe Ruth is often saying, well, he was one of the best baseball players alive. How do you feel like the respect and the relationship was?
I wouldn't call it rare. In fact, I think there's probably a strong, maybe plurality is a good word. The best of the major leaguers, regardless of their racial feelings, had great respect for the Negro leaguers. Now, many did not also, but we hear about the ones that did.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very good. Interesting. All right. Okay, thank you. That is John Henry Lloyd. And let's move on to our next person to be in the shortstop position, who is Willie Wells. So we've got Willie Wells. Let me just find my notes over here. Born in Texas in 1906, and he died in 1989. Apparently, he made his first debut for the St. Louis Stars in 1924. And again, if we look at the number of teams he played for, there's a huge number of teams. He's 10 times All-Star, and also he's in the Baseball Hall of Fame in the US, Cuba, and Mexico. So again, that kind of tells us quite a lot about him from what I could see. But what else can we add about Willie Wells and his achievements?
Well, let me start with just one. Oh,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, Jim.
Go ahead, Ted.
Okay, I'm just going to add another, as I'm full of cute points. He's the best Yankee shortstop to wear number 2. In 1945, he played for the New York Black Yankees, and he wore number 2. I think that's Derek Jeter's number, if I'm not mistaken. But that's my little cute statement about Willie Wells.
Go ahead, Jim.
Okay. Wells is another one of these long-time star players. Shortstop, I think, was his only position. I mean, this is not to say he might not have filled in somewhere in the infield over his career, but he was basically known as a shortstop. There's this interesting continuity of really good shortstops in the Negro League, starting with Grant Johnson around before and after 1900. Then there's John Henry Lloyd. Then there's Lundy, who literally filled Lloyd's shoes. And then there's Willie Wells. I will soon be making a pitch that those two aren't in the Hall of Fame. Might look good in the Hall of Fame. We'll leave it that way for now. Anyway, Wells, 25 years, normalized to 19 homers, 128 RBIs, 327 batting average. So he's a good fielding shortstop with power. Also a manager later on, managed the Newark Eagles twice in the 40s, managed the New York Black Yankees for part of the season. He was on a lot of different teams, but as we spoke about in a previous episode, that's not really because he wasn't wanted. His longest stint was with the St. Louis Stars in the 20s. They went out of business. He spent 6 years with the Newark Eagles. He was inclined, and this is not a knock on him, because as the 19th century ball player and writer Saul White said, a ball player's got to make his money while he can, because your career doesn't last that long. Willie was inclined to take off south. He's in those other countries' halls of fame because he would frequently bolt his Negro League team, go to Mexico, etc. But that's the way it worked in those days. But he was always in demand. You know, the thing about when you don't have the reserve clause and you don't have players locked in, well, how do you know he was any good? Because some good team always wanted him. That's how you really rank or validate, I guess you could say, the really early black players before the leagues. Some good team always wanted him. Well, some good team always wanted Willie Wells. And he, for reasons not always having anything to do with his skill level, he was available. And someone was always ready to scoop him up.
Could I ask you a question on that there, Jim? You know, these players are going to Mexico, they're going to Cuba and so on. Are they making comparable money there? Are they making more money in those countries?
They're making more.
They're making more?
They're making more.
Right.
The Mexican League in the 40s, particularly, who was the guy's name? The owner, the guy who ran the Mexican League. I can't think of his name. But anyway.
Jorge Pascual?
Pascual. Not Camilo Pascual, but Jorge Pascual. He wanted to make the Mexican League a powerful league. He had a lot of money from sources that I don't recall. He paid Negro Leaguers over-the-top salaries. He also paid some major leaguers over the top, 5 or 6 major leaguers, particularly fairly well-known Sal Maglie, deserted their teams and went to the Mexican League for a few years until the money ran out and they all came back. But it was salaries of maybe twice what the average Negro League could play were dangled in front of these guys. They would be crazy not to go for it. And they went for it.
Yeah.
Wells played on in the 40s with Satchel Paige's All-Stars as well, so he did some barnstorming with that. Page picked him as somebody that he wanted, which again, sort of to Jim's point about being in demand, and you can sort of look to things like that. And Wells often compared a little bit in character to Oscar Charleston. I mean, his nickname was El Diablo, right? The devil. He had a rather fiery, and that sometimes got him in a little bit of, and so the comparison is sometimes made to Oscar Charleston, that they had fairly similar approaches on the field. One of the other things that Seamhead does is they will make comparisons, and I mentioned this yesterday, across the positions. And when they're looking at shortstops and comparing the top 50 on their WAR, Willie Wells is number 1 at 65.5.
Wow.
And Dick Lundy is second at 36.9.
Wow.
And so, I mean, the significant difference, but they're 1 and 2, right at the top of that list when you look at those stats. And so, I think that says a lot about Wells's contributions to the many teams he played for. It's the reason that he was so sought after.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you very much. So let's move on to our last suggested player to play shortstop, who is Dick Lundy. Again, incredible numbers, a huge number of teams. Bill James ranked him as the 3rd greatest shortstop in Negro League history. behind Willie Wells, as we've already just talked about, and behind John Henry Lloyd. So, yeah, it's a strong lineup at shortstop. What have we got on Dick Lundy, which makes him the man?
Again, around for a long time, always good. Managed, I think, 3 teams: the Eagles, the Backrack Giants, and the Baltimore Black Sox. And sometimes Negro League managers, well, they're sort of like team captains trying to keep a cap on things, keep things going in the right direction. But there are others, Lloyd being one and Lundy being the other, who were really respected as managers in addition to players. And he was. He's got that .319 seam heads lifetime batting average, a lot of RBIs, not a big power guy, and he didn't play in the dead ball area. Not a tremendous power guy, but a good hitter, great glove. I'd like to know, and I was there at the time. I'd like to know why he isn't in the Hall of Fame, but I can't figure that out. Anyway, he's part of that continuity of shortstops, great shortstops that just sort of one blended into the next, and there's a substantial hole in the continuity there that could be remedied by putting him in the Hall.
But I think, and this is just my thought, Jim, that I think that's part of the reason he isn't there is because of who he came up against in terms of and thinking, and he just not as much known about him, not talked about as much, and so he sort of fell below. There just aren't as many people. There weren't as many people telling stories about Lundy, and I think when you thought of you thought of Pop Lloyd first, and Lundy always came second. Even though reading about him, one of the descriptions talked, and I thought that they described him as having grace, range, and a rifle arm in terms of his play. In that 1952 Pittsburgh Courier poll, he's listed as the 3rd best there as well. But that's sort of the thing. He comes in just behind these others, and so I think for a lot of people, they just don't know enough about him. He didn't play for some of the big and the bad that people, until your book came out, right, Jim, on the Backrack Giants, that wasn't a team most people knew. People think of the Monarchs, people think of the Pittsburgh Crawfords, they'll even think of the Harrisburg Giants for those 3 or 4 years and Lundy doesn't fit in many of those categories. So that's my take on why he didn't necessarily get the consideration, and still doesn't, that he should.
Yeah, he's kind of a laid back guy.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Ted.
I think Leslie put her finger on it there, because Lloyd and Wells, they're 1-2 in so many counting stats for shortstops, and here this poor guy comes between the 2 of them. So I think that's a good answer to your question, Andy. One thing I want to add, it'd be a great team to have all 3 of these shortstops, because Lloyd bats from the left side, Wells from the right, and Lundy switch hits. So a manager could have a lot of fun with those 3 guys.
Wells would never move off a shortstop. Monty Irvin came to the Newark Eagles as a rookie, and he had played shortstop wherever he was before. And so he goes out in the field and starts scooping up grounders during practice. And Willie walks over and says, "What's your position?" "I'm a shortstop." "Not here, you're not. I'm the shortstop." Points to center field. "You're out there."
Brutal, hey, yeah.
Yeah, and there's your difference between Lloyd and Wells.
Okay, well, thank you very much to all of you for that interesting conversation. That's been absolutely amazing. Thank you very much to the viewers for watching, and please tune in again for the next edition of this, which will be coming out in the next few days, and you should be able to see in the next few videos more of the painting developing. So thank you very much for being here, and good night. Thank you.
Good night, Andy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andy.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Rugby England. I hope you enjoyed that video about the prospective shortstop for our Negro League Dream Team. So what I need you to do now is go to my Twitter page and vote on who you think out of those 3 players should be added to the canvas. So my Twitter page or Twitter handle is @AndyBisAnArtist. So if you go there now, you should be able to see a poll in which you'll be able to vote for which of the 3 players you would like to see put onto the dream team behind me. So thank you very much for watching as ever. Like and subscribe, whatever that means. And I hope you join us again for the next time. Thanks very much. Take care. Goodbye.